London, 1858. Miss Clara Rothwell drew her shawl tighter around her shoulders as the cold evening air seeped through the carriage window. At 8 and 20, Clara had long resigned herself to a life of quiet dignity as an unmarried lady of modest means. Not quite a spinster yet, perhaps, but certainly on the precipice of that dreaded designation. "Sit up straight, Clara," her aunt, Lady Margaret Harwick, scolded. "The Yorkshires may have invited us as a courtesy to your late father, but that doesn't mean you should present yourself as though you've already given up." Clara straightened her posture reflexively, but kept her gaze fixed on the passing London townhouses. "I haven't given up, aunt. I've simply accepted reality. 8 seasons without a proposal speaks volumes about my prospects." "Nonsense. You simply need to apply yourself. Your countenance is pleasing enough when you smile, which is admittedly rare these days." Clara had heard this lecture countless times. In truth, her lack of matrimonial success stemmed not from insufficient effort, but from a combination of modest dowry, unremarkable family connections, and what society deemed an unfortunate tendency toward forthright speech. Men of quality did not seek wives who spoke their minds. As the carriage pulled up to the Yorkshire mansion, Clara steeled herself for another evening of forced smiles, polite conversation, and inevitable disappointment. The familiar weight of social expectation settled on her shoulders as she ascended the marble steps. "Lady Margaret Harwick and Miss Clara Rothwell," announced the butler as they entered the ballroom. A few heads turned briefly before returning to more interesting company. Clara had become accustomed to such dismissal. She was neither beautiful enough to command attention nor wealthy enough to warrant pursuit. At best, she might secure a dance with an elderly widower or a gentleman seeking temporary diversion before pursuing more advantageous matches. "I shall find Mrs. Yorkshire," Lady Margaret said. "Do try to look approachable, Clara." Left alone, Clara retreated to the perimeter of the ballroom, finding comfort in her usual position as an observer rather than participant. From her vantage point, she watched as debutantes fluttered their fans and gentlemen postured for attention. "Another season, another parade of the desperate and the disinterested," she murmured to herself. "A rather cynical assessment, wouldn't you say?" Clara started at the deep voice behind her. Turning, she found herself facing a tall gentleman with penetrating grey eyes and a composed expression that revealed little of his thoughts. "Your Grace," she curtsied immediately, recognizing Quentin Yarborough, the Duke of Westmoreland. His reputation preceded him, widowed young, exceedingly wealthy, and notoriously selective in his social engagements. "Forgive me. I didn't realize I was speaking aloud." "No forgiveness necessary, miss." "Rothwell, Clara Rothwell." "Miss Rothwell," he inclined his head slightly. "Your observation, while perhaps impolite, was not entirely inaccurate." Clara studied him cautiously, uncertain whether to retreat into proper banality or continue with honesty. "Truth and propriety are often at odds in ballrooms, Your Grace." A hint of amusement flickered across his face. "Indeed, which explains why I find them tedious affairs." "Then why attend?" The question escaped before Clara could reconsider its impertinence. She expected him to excuse himself, but instead he seemed to consider her question seriously. Obligation, expectation, the occasional hope of meaningful conversation, his gaze held hers, which has been in short supply until this moment. The orchestra began a new set, and to Clara's astonishment, the Duke extended his hand. "Would you do me the honor of this dance, Miss Rothwell?" Clara felt the room shift around her. Dukes did not ask unfashionable spinsters to dance without reason. Perhaps he had made a wager, perhaps he sought to cause a stir. Whatever his motivation, she could not refuse without causing a scene. "I would be honored, Your Grace," she said, placing her gloved hand in his. As he led her onto the floor, Clara became acutely aware of the whispers and stares. The formidable Duke of Westmoreland dancing with plain, outspoken Miss Rothwell. Inconceivable. The music began, and Clara forced herself to focus on the steps rather than the scrutiny. The Duke moved with fluid grace, his hand firm at her waist as he guided her through the waltz. "You dance well, Miss Rothwell," he observed. "I've had sufficient practice, Your Grace, though limited partners." "Their loss, it seems." Clara searched his face for mockery but found none. "You're very kind, though I must wonder at your choice of partner when so many more suitable ladies are available." "Suitable by whose measure?" "Society's, of course." He guided her through a turn with practiced ease. "I find society's measures frequently arbitrary and rarely aligned with qualities of genuine value." "And what qualities do you value, Your Grace?" "Honesty, intelligence, the courage to speak one's mind, even when inconvenient." Clara nearly missed a step. "Those are not qualities typically prized in a lady." "Perhaps that explains my continued bachelorhood following my wife's passing." The dance ended too quickly, and Clara curtsied as custom dictated. The Duke bowed and, to her further surprise, offered his arm. "Might I escort you to the refreshment table, Miss Rothwell?" Accepting his arm, Clara felt dozens of eyes following their progress across the room. Lady Margaret watched with unconcealed astonishment as the Duke himself procured Clara a glass of punch. "I fear I've made you the subject of speculation," he said, handing her the glass. "A novel experience, to be sure." "Usually, I'm merely the subject of dismissal." "A foolish oversight on the part of London society." Clara sipped her punch, studying him over the rim of her glass. "You speak as though you stand apart from society, Your Grace." "Don't we all stand apart in our private thoughts? The difference lies merely in who admits it." He set his untouched glass aside. "Would you consider joining me for a turn in the garden? It grows rather stifling in here." Propriety dictated refusal without a chaperone, but Clara found herself nodding. "Briefly, perhaps." In the moonlit garden, Clara felt both liberation and trepidation. Walking beside the Duke along a gravel path bordered by neatly trimmed hedges, she waited for him to reveal his purpose in singling her out. "You must be wondering why I requested your company," he said, as if reading her thoughts. "The question had crossed my mind. I observed you earlier, watching the proceedings with such clear-eyed assessment. In a room full of performance, you alone seemed authentic." Clara smiled ruefully, a polite way of noting I lacked the social graces to dissemble. "I consider it a virtue, not a shortcoming." He paused beside a stone bench. "May we sit?" Once seated, the Duke turned slightly to face her. "Miss Rothwell, I have a proposition that may seem unusual." Clara felt her guard rise. "I'm listening, Your Grace." "I require a companion for my sister, Lady Emilia. She is 17 and in need of a sensible guide before her debut next season. Her previous companion resigned rather suddenly after Emilia's spirited resistance to instruction." Clara blinked, unsure whether to feel relieved or insulted. "You wish to hire me as a governess?" "A companion," he corrected. "Lady Emilia has completed her formal education. She requires guidance in social matters from someone who sees society clearly, without illusions." "And you believe I'm suited to this role because?" "Because you observe keenly, speak honestly, and would not be seduced by flattery or intimidated by position." He paused. "The position comes with generous compensation and full residence at Westmoreland House in London, with summers at our country estate in Derbyshire." Clara considered his offer. Her current circumstances were far from ideal. Living with her aunt as a dependent relation meant constant reminders of her failure to secure a husband. The modest annuity left by her father barely covered her personal expenses. Why not engage a more conventional companion? A widow from a good family, perhaps. "I've tried conventional approaches. My sister saw through them immediately." His expression softened slightly. "Emilia lost our mother young, followed by my wife, who had begun to guide her. She needs someone genuine, not another hired pretense." "I see." Clara folded her hands in her lap. "And if I were to accept, when would my duties commence?" "Immediately, if possible." "Emilia is currently under the supervision of our housekeeper, an arrangement neither finds satisfactory." Clara nodded slowly. "I would need to discuss this with my aunt." "Of course." He rose, offering his hand to assist her. "Shall we return to the ballroom? I'm sure Lady Harwick is wondering at your prolonged absence." As they walked back, Clara considered his proposition. Employment as a companion wasn't the future she had envisioned for herself, but it offered independence and purpose, two things sorely lacking in her current existence. Still, becoming an employee of the man who had momentarily elevated her in society's eyes carried its own sting. In the days following the Yorkshire ball, London buzzed with speculation about the Duke's interest in the unremarkable Miss Rothwell. Some suggested a secret engagement, others hinted at less respectable arrangements. When Clara accepted the position as Lady Amelia's companion, the true nature of the Duke's attention seemed confirmed. He had merely been interviewing her for employment. Clara arrived at Westmoreland House on a brisk April morning, her modest belongings packed in 2 trunks. The imposing mansion on Grosvenor Square spoke of generations of wealth and influence. As she ascended the steps, Clara reminded herself that she entered not as a guest, but as an employee, a distinction she must keep firmly in mind. The butler, Mr. Finch, received her with formal courtesy. "His Grace is currently attending to business matters, but asked that you be shown to your quarters and introduced to Lady Amelia at your convenience." Clara's rooms exceeded her expectations. A spacious bedchamber connected to a small sitting room, appointed with quality furnishings and overlooking a private garden. It was more luxury than she had known since her father's death, yet it emphasized her ambiguous position, neither servant nor equal. After changing from her traveling clothes into a simple grey dress appropriate for her new station, Clara requested to meet Lady Amelia. Mr. Finch directed her to the music room, where the sounds of a pianoforte, played with more enthusiasm than precision, echoed down the corridor. Clara paused in the doorway, observing the young woman at the instrument. Lady Amelia Yarborough had her brother's dark hair and striking features, though her expression carried a restlessness that suggested containment rather than the Duke's natural reserve. "You must be Miss Rothwell," Lady Amelia said without ceasing her playing. "My brother said you would arrive today." "I am, and you are Lady Amelia. I'm pleased to make your acquaintance." The girl struck a discordant note and turned on the bench. "Are you? Most people find me trying. That's what my last companion said before she fled to the country." Clara entered the room fully, noting the defensive posture beneath Lady Amelia's seemingly casual demeanor. "I haven't formed an opinion yet, though I admit your brother warned me you might be challenging." "Did he?" Lady Amelia's eyes lit with interest. "What exactly did he say?" "That you've sent away several companions through what he termed spirited resistance to instruction." To Clara's surprise, Lady Amelia laughed, a genuine sound of amusement. "That's diplomatic of him. I made Mrs. Winters cry daily for a fortnight before she claimed ill health and departed." "I'm not easily moved to tears," Clara said calmly. "Nor am I here to instruct you in anything you don't wish to learn." Lady Amelia's expression turned suspicious. "Then what exactly are you here for?" "Companionship, as the position suggests, guidance when requested, honest conversation when needed." Clara moved to the window, giving the girl space. "Beyond that, I suppose we shall discover our arrangement as we go." How refreshingly vague. Lady Amelia closed the pianoforte lid. "Did my brother also mention, I have no interest in making my debut or participating in the marriage market?" "He did not, though I can sympathize with your reluctance." "Can you?" "I thought all unmarried women were desperate to secure husbands." Clara smiled wryly. "I've survived 8 London seasons without succumbing to desperation. The quality of one's life need not depend upon matrimony." "You've had 8 seasons." Lady Amelia studied her with new interest. "Yet you're here as a companion rather than a wife. Why?" "Some women lack the particular combination of beauty, fortune, and temperament that attracts suitable offers. And you're one such woman." "Evidently." Lady Amelia stood, moving closer to examine Clara with frank curiosity. "You don't seem particularly bothered by it. There are worse fates than independence, such as a loveless marriage of convenience." Clara met the girl's gaze directly, precisely. A tentative understanding passed between them, the beginning of a connection founded on mutual recognition rather than authority. "Perhaps you won't be entirely tedious," Lady Amelia conceded. "Though I make no promises about my behavior." I wouldn't expect otherwise. The Duke of Westmoreland proved an elusive figure in the following weeks. He appeared at breakfast occasionally, inquired politely after Clara's adjustment to the household, and conversed briefly with his sister before disappearing into his study or departing for business in the city. His reserved manner made it impossible for Clara to discern his thoughts regarding her performance. Meanwhile, Clara and Lady Amelia established a cautious rapport. The girl was intelligent but undisciplined, passionate about music and literature, but resistant to subjects she deemed matrimonial preparation. Clara chose not to force the issue, instead focusing on building trust. One rainy afternoon, as they sat in the library with their respective books, Lady Amelia broke their comfortable silence. "Why have you never married, Miss Rothwell, truly?" Clara looked up from her novel. "That's rather direct. You promised honesty when needed. I need to understand." Setting her book aside, Clara considered how to answer. "I received 2 offers over the years. The first from a gentleman 30 years, my senior, seeking a nurse rather than a wife. The second from a man who made it clear my primary appeal lay in my father's modest estate." "You refused them both." "I did. Because you wanted love." Clara smiled faintly. "Because I wanted respect. Love seemed an unrealistic expectation for someone of my station and circumstances." Lady Amelia frowned. "That's terribly sad." "Is it? I've seen many marriages founded on less honorable considerations than mutual respect." "Like my parents." The question carried a weight beyond its simplicity. Clara tread carefully. "I couldn't say. I never had the privilege of knowing your parents." "They despised each other," Lady Amelia said matter-of-factly. "Father married mother for her fortune, and mother married father for his title. They maintained separate residences for most of their marriage." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I barely remember them together." Lady Amelia traced a pattern on the arm of her chair. "Quentin practically raised me. After his wife died, it was just the 2 of us, really." "Your brother seems devoted to your welfare," Clara observed. "He is, though he's dreadfully overprotective and entirely too serious." She glanced toward the door, lowering her voice. "Sometimes I wonder if he'll ever allow himself happiness again. Elizabeth's death changed him." Before Clara could respond, the library door opened and the Duke himself entered. His expression suggested he'd caught the tail end of their conversation. "Discussing me in my absence, Amelia?" he asked, though his tone held more resignation than reproach. "Miss Rothwell was curious about you," Lady Amelia replied with innocent mischief. "Was she indeed?" The Duke's gaze shifted to Clara, who felt a flush rise unbidden to her cheeks. "Your sister was sharing her concerns for your happiness, your grace," Clara admitted. An indication of her affection, not idle gossip. Something in his expression softened. "My happiness is not a matter requiring concern." He turned to his sister. "I came to inform you that Lady Harwick has invited us to dine tomorrow evening. She specifically requested Miss Rothwell's presence." Clara stiffened at the mention of her aunt. Lady Margaret had been vocally opposed to her accepting the position, viewing it as a descent in social standing. Her sudden interest in hosting them suggested ulterior motives. "Must we go?" Lady Amelia groaned. "Lady Harwick always examines me like a horse at auction." "It would be impolite to refuse without cause," the Duke replied. "Besides, it may provide Miss Rothwell an opportunity to visit with her aunt." "My aunt requires no special occasion to share her opinions with me, Your Grace," Clara said dryly. "But of course, I shall attend if you wish it." The following evening, Clara found herself seated in the Westmoreland carriage beside Lady Amelia, facing the Duke. She had chosen her finest dress, a deep blue silk that had been remodeled twice over the years, but still maintained an air of simple elegance. "You look very well tonight, Miss Rothwell," the Duke remarked unexpectedly. Clara glanced up, startled by the personal observation. "Thank you, Your Grace." "Doesn't she?" Lady Amelia agreed enthusiastically. "Blue is definitely your color, Miss Rothwell. It brings out your eyes." "You are both very kind," Clara murmured, discomforted by the attention. The Duke continued to observe her with an intensity that made her increasingly self-conscious. "I've been meaning to inquire how you're finding your position thus far." Emilia seems more settled in your company." "I enjoy Lady Emilia's company greatly," Clara replied honestly. "She has a quick mind and refreshing perspectives." "High praise indeed," Lady Emilia preened. "And the household suits you," the Duke persisted. Clara considered her response carefully. "It does, Your Grace. Though I admit to some uncertainty regarding my role at social engagements, such as tonight's dinner. Am I attending as Lady Emilia's companion or as a family connection through my aunt?" "Both, I suppose," he answered after a moment's reflection. "Though I would prefer you consider yourself our guest rather than an employee in such settings. That may prove challenging, given society's rigid views on such distinctions." The carriage slowed to a stop before he could respond, and a footman opened the door. The Duke descended first, then offered his hand to assist both ladies. When Clara placed her fingers in his, she was startled by the warmth that spread from the brief contact, despite their gloves. Lady Margaret's townhouse, while respectable, paled in comparison to Westmoreland House. Clara noted her aunt's thinly veiled pride in hosting a duke, as well as the calculating assessment in her eyes when she greeted them. "Your Grace, what an honor! Lady Emilia, how you've grown." Lady Margaret turned to Clara last. "Clara, dear, you're looking well. Employment seems to agree with you." The slight emphasis on employment did not go unnoticed. Clara simply smiled and thanked her aunt for the invitation. As they moved to the drawing room, Clara realized this was no intimate family dinner. At least a dozen guests were already present, including several eligible young ladies and their ambitious mothers. Lady Margaret's strategy became immediately apparent. She hoped to place suitable marriage prospects in the Duke's path, while reminding Clara of her reduced circumstances. Throughout dinner, Clara maintained a dignified silence unless directly addressed. Lady Emilia, seated beside her, grew increasingly sullen as she was subjected to patronizing questions from the other guests. "Tell me, Lady Emilia," simpered Miss Fanny Denham, a renowned beauty in her third season, "are you looking forward to your debut? I'm sure your brother will spare no expense to see you properly launched." "I have no interest in being launched," Lady Emilia replied tersely. "I find the entire process degrading." A shocked silence followed before Miss Denham tittered nervously. "How amusingly unconventional you are." "She isn't being amusing," Clara interjected quietly. "Lady Emilia expresses a legitimate perspective that many young women share but few are permitted to voice." All eyes turned to Clara, including the Duke's. His expression was unreadable, but he made no move to contradict her defense of his sister. "Well," Lady Margaret said sharply, "I hardly think Miss Rothwell's views on proper society are relevant, given her current station." The Duke set down his fork deliberately. "On the contrary, Lady Harwick. I find Miss Rothwell's insights invaluable precisely because she observes society from multiple perspectives. It is why I selected her as Emilia's companion." A flush of mingled embarrassment and gratification warmed Clara's cheeks. Lady Margaret's lips thinned with displeasure, but she could hardly rebuke a duke at her own table. After dinner, the ladies withdrew to the drawing room while the gentlemen remained for port. Clara found herself cornered by her aunt. "I hope you realize what you're doing, Clara," Lady Margaret hissed under her breath. "By speaking so freely in the Duke's presence, you risk your position." "My position requires honesty, aunt. His Grace values that quality." "Does he indeed?" Lady Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Be careful you don't mistake professional tolerance for personal regard. Men of his station may appreciate forthright employees, but they marry women who enhance their position, not challenge it." Clara felt the barb strike true. "I harbor no illusions about my place, aunt, unlike some in this room who seem determined to orchestrate matches where no interest exists." Lady Margaret had the grace to look momentarily abashed before rallying. "The Duke must remarry eventually. He needs an heir. Better he consider suitable options than allow his attention to wander inappropriately." Before Clara could respond, the drawing-room door opened, and the gentlemen joined them. The Duke's gaze immediately sought Clara, and finding her engaged with her aunt, he made his way toward them. "Lady Harwick, might I borrow Miss Rothwell for a moment? I believe Lady Emilia is in need of her counsel." Indeed, Lady Amelia sat stiffly by the pianoforte, surrounded by well-meaning but oblivious matrons offering unwanted advice about her coming debut. "Of course, Your Grace," Lady Margaret acquiesced, unable to refuse. As they crossed the room, the Duke spoke in a low voice. "Forgive my intervention, but you looked in need of rescue." Clara glanced up at him in surprise. "I thought it was Lady Amelia who required assistance." "A convenient pretext," he admitted with the barest hint of a smile, though she would certainly welcome liberation from her current siege. This glimpse of humor transformed his features, softening the austerity that typically characterized his expression. Clara found herself momentarily speechless. "Miss Rothwell," Lady Amelia exclaimed with obvious relief as they approached. "These ladies were just explaining how I might improve my posture to attract a suitable husband." "An essential skill," Clara replied solemnly, though her eyes conveyed understanding of the girl's discomfort. "Though perhaps we might continue that discussion another time. His Grace was just mentioning a matter requiring your attention." Understanding immediately, Lady Amelia rose. "Yes, of course. If you'll excuse us, ladies." The three retreated to a quieter corner of the room, where Lady Amelia sighed dramatically. "This evening is interminable. Please say we may leave soon, Quentin." "We've fulfilled our social obligation," he conceded. "I'll have the carriage brought around." As they prepared to depart, Lady Margaret made one final attempt to extend their visit, suggesting music or cards. The Duke declined politely but firmly, citing an early appointment the following day. In the carriage returning to Westmoreland House, Lady Amelia fell asleep against the cushioned seat, leaving Clara and the Duke in awkward proximity. "I must apologize for my aunt's transparent machinations this evening," Clara said softly, to avoid waking Lady Amelia. "No apology necessary. I'm well accustomed to such strategies." The Duke's voice held a note of weariness. "Though I confess I didn't anticipate quite so many eligible young ladies at what was presented as a family dinner. My aunt is nothing if not thorough in her campaigns." A quiet chuckle escaped him, the first genuine laugh Clara had heard from him. "Indeed, though she seemed equally determined to remind you of your place, as I believe I overheard." Clara tensed. "You heard our conversation." "Fragments only, enough to gather her concern about your forthright manner in my presence. My aunt believes that knowing one's place is the highest feminine virtue." "And what do you believe, Miss Rothwell?" The question hung between them in the darkened carriage, weighted with meaning beyond its simple phrasing. "I believe that honesty between persons of good character transcends social distinctions," she answered carefully, "though I recognize that view may be considered naive." "Not naive." Rare, his voice had softened, and in the dim light from the passing street lamps, his expression seemed almost vulnerable, refreshingly so. They lapsed into silence until the carriage arrived at Westmoreland House. The Duke gently woke his sister, who stumbled sleepily into the house with Clara's assistance. After seeing Lady Amelia to her room, Clara returned to the main staircase, intending to retire herself. The Duke waited at the bottom of the stairs. "Miss Rothwell, might I have a word in my study before you retire?" Puzzled by the formal request, Clara nodded. "Of course, Your Grace." She followed him to his study, a handsome room lined with books and dominated by a massive desk. He gestured for her to take a seat before the fireplace, where a small blaze took the chill from the spring evening. "I wish to speak with you privately about Emilia," he began, remaining standing. "Her debut is approaching, and despite her protestations, certain social obligations cannot be avoided without consequences. I understand, though I sympathize with her reluctance." "As do I," he paced briefly before continuing. "However, I've observed that she respects your opinion. You've connected with her in a way previous companions failed to achieve. We understand each other, I believe." "Precisely." He paused, turning to face her directly. "Would you be willing to accompany us to Westmoreland Park for the summer? Emilia might benefit from gradual social exposure in the country before facing London society." Clara considered the request. Summer in Derbyshire sounded far more appealing than London's heat and crowds, yet the prospect of increased proximity to the Duke himself carried complications she'd been trying to ignore. Over the past weeks, Clara had become uncomfortably aware of her growing admiration for him. She appreciated his quiet intelligence, his devotion to his sister, and the rare moments when his reserve gave way to warmth. Such feelings were dangerous for a woman in her position, a path to certain heartbreak. "If you believe it would benefit Lady Amelia, I would be happy to accompany you," she said finally. "Excellent." He seemed genuinely pleased. "We shall depart next week, once the current parliamentary session concludes." As she rose to leave, the Duke stepped forward. "Miss Rothwell, I also wish to express my appreciation for your defense of Amelia this evening. Your willingness to speak on her behalf, despite the social risk, demonstrates the very quality I hoped for when I engaged you. It was nothing extraordinary, Your Grace. Lady Amelia deserves to have her feelings respected. Nevertheless, I am grateful." He hesitated, then added, "I fear my sister has few allies who understand her reluctance to participate in what she views as a marital marketplace." "Perhaps because it is precisely that," Clara observed. "You speak from experience." It wasn't a question, but Clara answered anyway. 8 seasons provides ample opportunity to observe the mechanics of the marriage mart, Your Grace. And yet you never succumbed to its pressures. "I lacked sufficient value to attract serious negotiation," she replied with practiced lightness. "A blessing in disguise, perhaps." Something in his expression suggested he wished to contradict her, but he merely inclined his head. "Good night, Miss Rothwell." "Good night, Your Grace." As Clara climbed the stairs to her room, she scolded herself for the lingering warmth his regard had kindled. Whatever appreciation he felt for her service to his sister remained firmly within the bounds of employment. Lady Margaret's warning echoed in her mind. Men of his station might value forthright employees, but they married women who enhanced their position. Clara had long ago accepted that love was not in her future. She would not now indulge in foolish fantasies about a man so far beyond her reach. Better to focus on her duties and the genuine affection growing between herself and Lady Amelia. Still, as she prepared for bed, she could not help but recall the way the Duke had looked at her in the carriage, as though truly seeing her, and wondered what it might mean to be valued for precisely those qualities society had deemed undesirable in a wife. Westmoreland Park exceeded all expectations. The ancestral estate sprawled across thousands of acres of Derbyshire countryside, with formal gardens giving way to wild woodland and meadows beyond. The house itself was a masterpiece of symmetry and proportion, built in the previous century but maintained with exacting care. Lady Amelia blossomed in the freedom of the country. Away from London's scrutiny, she rode daily, practiced her music without interruption, and engaged with the local gentry without the pressure of performance that characterized town society. Clara, too, found herself relaxing into the rhythms of country life. Her duties became less formal as Lady Amelia increasingly sought her company by choice rather than obligation. They read together in the gardens, discussed literature and music, and even attended the local assembly rooms where Lady Amelia could practice social interaction in a less intimidating environment. The Duke, however, remained an enigma. Though more frequently present than in London, he often secluded himself in his study with estate business or rode out to inspect his lands. When he did join them for meals or evening activities, he maintained a polite distance, though Clara occasionally caught him observing her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. One afternoon, nearly a month into their stay, Clara sat reading in the library when the Duke entered unexpectedly. "Miss Rothwell," he acknowledged, seeming surprised to find her there. "I apologize for interrupting your solitude." "Not at all, Your Grace. The library is your domain." She made to rise, but he gestured for her to remain seated. "Please continue with your reading." "I merely came to retrieve some agricultural reports." He moved to his desk, sorting through papers. Clara attempted to return to her book, but his presence proved distracting. After reading the same paragraph 3 times without comprehension, she gave up the pretense. "Lady Amelia seems to be thriving here," she observed. "The country agrees with her temperament." He looked up from his papers. "Yes, I've noticed the improvement in her spirits. Your influence has been beneficial." The credit belongs to her natural resilience, and perhaps to the absence of London's expectations. You share her distaste for those expectations, I think. He set aside the reports and moved closer, taking a seat in the chair opposite hers. I recognize their utility in maintaining social order, Clara replied carefully, but I question their wisdom in determining individual happiness. A diplomatic answer. You prefer candor, I believe. A smile touched his lips. I do. Then yes, I find many societal expectations stifling and arbitrary, particularly for women. Lady Amelia's reluctance to be paraded before potential suitors reflects a healthy self-respect, not improper rebellion. The Duke studied her with that now familiar intensity. Have you always been so forthright in your opinions, Miss Rothwell? Not always. I learned through painful experience that suppressing one's true thoughts leads to regrettable decisions. What experience taught you that lesson? Clara hesitated, uncertain whether to share something so personal. Yet his genuine interest encouraged honesty. In my second season, I allowed myself to be courted by a gentleman my aunt deemed suitable. Lord Talbot was handsome, charming, and apparently devoted. I ignored my misgivings about his character to please my family and secure my future. What happened? 3 days before he was expected to offer for me, he became engaged to an heiress newly arrived from the West Indies. Clara kept her voice even with practiced control. I later learned he had been negotiating with her father throughout our courtship. I'm sorry. Don't be. The experience was instructive if painful. I vowed thereafter to trust my judgment and speak my mind, regardless of consequence. She smiled faintly. A decision that effectively ended my marital prospects, but preserved my self-respect. The Duke leaned forward, his expression serious. Any man worthy of the name would value such integrity rather than fear it. Perhaps, but combined with modest dowry and unremarkable beauty, integrity becomes merely another impediment to advantageous matches. You undervalue yourself, Miss Rothwell. The quiet conviction in his voice stirred something dangerous in Clara's heart. She rose abruptly, needing distance from his penetrating gaze. You are kind to say so, Your Grace, but we both know society measures worth by different standards. She moved toward the door. If you'll excuse me, I promised Lady Amelia I would accompany her to visit the vicar's wife this afternoon. He stood as propriety demanded, but made no move to detain her. Of course, give Mrs. Whittaker my regards. Clara escaped the library with her composure intact, but her emotions in turmoil. The Duke's interest in her past, and his apparent appreciation for qualities society deemed undesirable in a woman, challenged her carefully maintained defenses against hope. Yet hope was a luxury she could ill afford. Whatever regard the Duke held for her remained bounded by their respective positions. To imagine otherwise would lead only to heartbreak. The following weeks brought increased social activity, as neighboring families called to pay their respects and issued invitations in return. Despite her status as a companion, Clara found herself treated with surprising consideration by the local gentry, who took their cue from the Duke's evident respect. At a garden party hosted by Sir William and Lady Russell, Clara stood with Lady Amelia near a rose arbor, observing the gathering. The Duke was engaged in conversation with several gentlemen across the lawn, occasionally glancing in their direction. My brother watches you again, Lady Amelia remarked casually. He does that frequently, you know. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. I'm sure he's merely ensuring you're properly attended. Lady Amelia rolled her eyes. I'm not a child requiring constant supervision. Besides, he's not looking at me. Lady Amelia, it's improper to make such insinuations. Is it improper to state facts? Quentin has changed since you joined our household. He smiles more. He dines with us regularly rather than hiding in his study. She plucked a rose petal, examining it with feigned fascination. And he inquires after you when you're not present. Clara's heart stuttered traitorously. Your brother is a considerate employer, nothing more. If you say so. Lady Amelia's tone suggested complete disbelief, though I wonder why he rejected Lady Helena Pennington's rather obvious overtures last evening. She's precisely the sort of beautiful, well-connected widow society expects him to pursue. Before Clara could formulate a response, the Duke himself approached, ending their conversation. "Emilia, Mrs. Russell has requested a demonstration of your musical talents. Would you oblige our hostess?" Lady Emilia sighed dramatically but complied, leaving Clara alone with the Duke beneath the rose arbor. An awkward silence descended until he finally spoke. "You seem to be enjoying the party, Miss Rothwell." "Indeed, Your Grace, the Russells are gracious hosts." "They are," he hesitated, then added, "I noticed you conversing with Mr. Lawrence earlier. He appeared quite captivated." Clara glanced at him in surprise. Mr. Lawrence, the widowed local magistrate, had indeed engaged her in a lengthy discussion of literature. "He's well-read and pleasant company. He's also seeking a wife." The statement hung between them, its implication unclear. Was the Duke warning her against inappropriate expectations, or was there another sentiment beneath his neutral tone? "Mr. Lawrence made no such indication to me," Clara said carefully, "though if he were, it would hardly be relevant to my position in your household." "Wouldn't it?" The Duke's gaze was penetrating. "Would you consider an offer from a respectable gentleman like Lawrence?" Clara studied him, trying to discern his purpose in this line of questioning. "Are you concerned about losing Lady Emilia's companion, Your Grace?" "I'm concerned about your happiness, Miss Rothwell." The simple statement, delivered with quiet sincerity, undermined Clara's carefully maintained defenses. "My happiness is not your responsibility." "Perhaps not, but I find myself invested in it nonetheless." Before she could respond to this bewildering admission, Lady Russell approached to claim the Duke's attention for some matter regarding dinner arrangements. He excused himself with evident reluctance, leaving Clara to ponder the meaning behind his words. That evening, as their carriage returned to Westmoreland Park, Lady Emilia fell asleep as was her habit, leaving Clara and the Duke in private conversation. "You were quiet at dinner," he observed. "Did something disturb you?" Clara considered deflecting but opted for honesty. "I'm confused by our earlier conversation, Your Grace. Your interest in my potential marital prospects seemed unexpected." In the dim carriage interior, his expression was difficult to discern. "I apologize if I overstepped. My question was presumptuous." "Not presumptuous, puzzling." She gathered her courage. "You speak as though you have some personal investment in my future arrangements." The Duke was silent for so long that Clara began to regret her boldness. Finally, he said, "I find myself increasingly concerned with your happiness, Miss Rothwell. More than is perhaps appropriate given our formal relationship." The careful admission sent Clara's thoughts spinning. "I don't understand." "Neither do I entirely." His voice had softened, becoming almost intimate in the darkness. "I engaged you for your forthright nature and good sense. I did not anticipate how greatly I would come to value your presence in my household and in my daily life." Clara's pulse quickened. "Your Grace." "Quentin," he interrupted. "When we are private, might you call me Quentin? Formality seems a needless barrier between us now." The request crossed a boundary Clara had believed firmly established. "I'm not certain that would be proper, given my position." "Your position," he sighed. "Always we return to considerations of position and propriety. Tell me, Clara, may I call you Clara? Do you never tire of society's arbitrary distinctions?" The use of her given name, spoken with such warmth, weakened her resolve. "Often, but I cannot ignore them without consequence, particularly when my livelihood depends upon maintaining appropriate boundaries. And if those boundaries were unnecessary? If your position were to change?" The carriage slowed as they approached Westmoreland Park, and moonlight through the window illuminated the Duke's, Quentin's, face. His expression held an intensity Clara had never before witnessed, a vulnerability at odds with his usual reserve. "I don't understand what you're suggesting," she whispered. "I'm suggesting nothing yet." He reached across the space between them, taking her gloved hand in his. "But I ask you to consider the possibility that our connection might evolve beyond its current parameters." The carriage stopped before Clara could respond, and Lady Emilia stirred awake. The moment shattered, leaving Clara with trembling hands and a mind full of dangerous possibilities. In the days that followed, Clara found herself both seeking and avoiding Quentin's company. His words in the carriage had awakened hopes she had long suppressed, yet she feared misinterpreting his meaning. Perhaps he merely wished for a more informal household, less bound by rigid proprieties. Yet the way he looked at her when they were together, with warmth and lingering attention, suggested something deeper than relaxed formality between employer and employee. Lady Amelia, ever observant, noticed the tension. "You and Quentin are behaving most peculiarly," she remarked as they walked in the garden one morning. "Did you quarrel?" "Of course not," Clara replied too quickly. "Then why do you both find urgent reasons to be elsewhere, whenever you're left alone together?" Clara sighed, unable to explain what she herself didn't fully understand. "Your brother and I had a conversation that left matters unsettled between us." "What sort of conversation?" "A private one." Lady Amelia grinned, undeterred by the rebuff. "He cares for you, you know, not as an employee or even a friend. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." "You're romanticizing a professional relationship," Clara protested, though her heart leapt at the girl's words. "Am I? Then why did he ask me yesterday how I would feel if he were to remarry?" Clara stopped abruptly, staring at Lady Amelia. "He discussed marriage with you." "Not directly. He posed it as a hypothetical question." Lady Amelia's expression turned serious. "I told him I would welcome his happiness, regardless of whom he chose." "And what did he say?" "That my approval meant everything to him." She took Clara's hands impulsively. "Don't you see? He was seeking my blessing to pursue you." Clara withdrew her hands gently. "You're jumping to conclusions, Emilia. Your brother would not consider someone of my station as a duchess." "Why not?" "He married Elizabeth for love, not advantage. Her father was only a baron, and her dowry was unremarkable. A baron's daughter remains far above a gentleman's daughter, with no fortune to speak of." Lady Amelia made a sound of frustration. "You're as stubborn as he is, both of you trapped in needless propriety when happiness is within reach." Before Clara could respond, a footman approached with a message. The Duke requested Miss Rothwell's presence in his study at her earliest convenience. With trepidation and a flutter of anticipation, Clara made her way to the study. She found Quentin standing by the window, his tall figure silhouetted against the summer light. He turned as she entered, his expression unreadable. "Miss Rothwell, Clara, thank you for coming." "You wished to see me, Your Grace." He winced slightly at her formal address. "Yes, though I had hoped we might dispense with titles in private." Clara clasped her hands tightly. "I think it best to maintain appropriate formality until the nature of our association is clarified. That is precisely why I asked to speak with you." He gestured toward the chairs by the fireplace, and they sat facing each other. "Our conversation in the carriage was interrupted before I could express myself clearly." "There is no need to explain further," Clara said quickly. "I understand your desire for a less formal household environment." "No, you don't understand at all." Frustration edged his voice. "I was not suggesting a mere relaxation of formalities between employer and employee. I was attempting, rather ineptly, to prepare you for a far more significant proposition." Clara's pulse quickened. "What proposition?" Quentin leaned forward, his gaze intent. "I find myself in an unexpected position, Clara. When I engaged you as Emilia's companion, I sought someone of intelligence and character who could guide my sister through society's complexities. I did not anticipate that in finding the perfect guide for Emilia, I would also discover a woman who challenges and compliments me in ways I had ceased to believe possible." Clara sat perfectly still, afraid to move lest she break the moment. "In recent weeks," he continued, "I have come to rely on your perspective, to seek your company, to find joy in your presence. These feelings extend far beyond professional appreciation." "What are you saying?" Clara whispered, needing absolute clarity. Quentin rose, then stunned her by kneeling before her chair. Taking her hands in his, he spoke with quiet intensity. "I am saying, Clara Rothwell, that I have fallen in love with your honest heart, your keen mind, and your gentle strength. I am asking if you might consider a permanent position in my household, not as my employee, but as my wife." Clara stared at him in disbelief. "Your wife, but I have no fortune, no connections worthy of a duke." "I have fortune and connections enough for both of us," he said with a smile. "What I lack is a partner who sees me clearly and speaks truth without fear, someone who values substance over appearance and integrity over advantage. I believe I have found that person in you." Tears filled Clara's eyes as years of resigned acceptance gave way to unexpected joy. "Society will disapprove. They'll say you married beneath you." "Let them say what they will." Quentin's thumbs stroked the backs of her hands. "I learned long ago that society's approval guarantees neither happiness nor fulfillment. My first marriage taught me to value deeper qualities in a wife than those society prizes." "And Emilia, what of her?" "She adores you already. In fact, she has been rather obvious in her matchmaking efforts of late." His expression turned serious. "But I must know, do you share any of my feelings, Clara, or have I misinterpreted the connection between us?" Clara looked into his eyes, warm grey eyes that had begun to haunt her dreams, and found the courage to acknowledge what her heart had known for weeks. "I have tried very hard not to love you," she admitted softly. "I believed such feelings were foolish and could lead only to disappointment, but despite my best efforts, my heart refused to obey reason." His expression lightened with hope. "Then you do care for me?" "More than I thought possible." She squeezed his hands. "But are you certain, truly certain, this is not a decision to make lightly?" "I have never been more certain of anything." Quentin raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her fingers. "Would you marry me, Clara Rothwell?" For a moment, Clara saw her life as it had been, the quiet resignation to spinsterhood, the acceptance of limited possibilities, the carefully managed expectations. Then she saw the future Quentin offered: partnership, respect, love freely given and received. "Yes," she said, her voice steady and clear. "Yes, I will marry you." Joy transformed his features as he rose, drawing her to her feet and into his embrace. His lips found hers in a tender kiss that promised a lifetime of understanding and devotion. As they stood together in the sunlit study, Clara thought of the night they had first danced, how she had believed it a momentary elevation before returning to obscurity. She could never have imagined that the Duke's request for a dance would lead to this moment of profound transformation, when the woman who had resigned herself to spinsterhood discovered that love had been waiting for her all along in the most unexpected of places. "What are you thinking?" Quentin asked softly, his forehead resting against hers. Clara smiled, her heart fuller than she had ever dreamed possible. "I'm thinking that sometimes life's greatest blessings arrive in disguise, as a dance with a duke who sees beyond society's narrow vision to the person within." "And I'm thinking," he replied, his arms tightening around her, "that asking you to dance was the wisest decision I ever made." Outside the study window, summer sunlight bathed Westmoreland Park in golden warmth, illuminating the beginning of their journey together, a journey founded not on society's expectations, but on the enduring power of recognition between kindred spirits who had found, against all odds, their perfect match.